March 30th and 31st of Bite Size Bible in a Year, chronological edition. All right, we read Joshua 22 through 24 and Judges 1 through 3, 6 chapters. I'm going to give you 1 point from each chapter, so I'm hoping to get this done in 6 minutes or less. So let's go. Joshua 22, the eastern tribes are returning home to the eastern side of the Jordan River. Remember, they had been on the western side, helping the other tribes in the promised land, but now it's time to go home. And so Joshua is talking to them in chapter 22, 4 and 5. And now the Lord your God has given the other tribes rest, the western tribes, as he promised them. So go back home to the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you as your possession on the east side of the Jordan River. But be very careful to obey all the commands and the instructions that Moses gave to you. Love the Lord your God, walk in all his ways, obey his commands, hold firmly to him, and serve him with all your heart and all your soul. So my point for chapter 22 is this. We rest from other things. We don't rest from God. And you can put in that blank whatever you want. Other things can be striving. It can be fighting. We rest from work, but we don't rest from God. If we're having like a real good season where things are going great, we can't get complacent with God because then we are like a sitting duck for temptation. Things come at us and we're not ready for them because we haven't been spending time with God. So we rest from other things, but we don't rest from God. Joshua 23. Joshua's final words to Israel. I'm going to read you 23:4. I have allotted to you as your homeland all the land of the nations yet unconquered, as well as the land of those we have already conquered. So here's the cool thing, is the land that they had already conquered was obviously Israel's, but Joshua is saying even the lands we haven't conquered yet are yours. And here's the question I want to ask us today. What has God told us we have victory over, but we're letting the enemy still have it? I know that one hurts, and I'm so sorry. But it's a good question to ask God. What is something in my life, is there anything in my life that God says I have victory over, but I'm letting the enemy have? Just ask him and see what he says. All right, chapter 4. Not 4, 24. The covenant is removed and Joshua and Eleazar die. What I want to pay attention to in chapter 24 is the actions of God, the verbs. Okay, it says that God took out Abraham from his land. He led him to the promised land, or to Canaan. He gave descendants. He sent. He brought the Israelites out. He destroyed enemies. He gave victory. He rescued. My point for chapter 24 is God matters in a life. He matters in a life. So when we're looking at life and we're thinking, is it worth it? Is walking with God even worth it? Yes, it is worth it. It's worth it because he does things like this. He brings us victory. And he destroys enemies and rescues and gives and leads. He's important to a life. So don't believe anything else. Okay, he matters. All right. That's the end of Joshua. By Joshua, Judges 1. We're seeing the Israelites. It's more talking about, them continuing in the promised land. And we see the Israelites did not drive out all of the enemy like they were supposed to. Because it says the enemy was determined to stay. So my point is, if we're going to walk in victory, we have to be more determined than the enemy. So if we're going to walk in victory, we have to be more determined than the enemy. We know that if we are really walking with God, being obedient, trying to be obedient, trying to listen. We know that we try to get up and do our quiet time and something comes at us, or like children crawling all over us or whatever. Or we're going to try to really do this thing for God, but we keep getting distracted. We have to decide, no, I'm going to be more determined to be obedient and walk in victory and find freedom than the enemy is determined to not let me. So we got to put on our big girl pants and fight off the lies and defeat them with truth, and then just walk with God. Be determined. Judges 2, we see the Israelites forget God. They're serving foreign gods. And I'm going to read you 2:10 through 12. Let me see if I can find it. Here it is. After that generation died, Joshua's generation, another generation grew up who did not acknowledge the Lord or remember the mighty things he had done for Israel. The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight and served the images of Baal. They abandoned, which was a foreign god. They abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. They went after other gods, worshiping the gods of the people around them, and they angered the Lord. And this is exactly what they told God and Joshua and Moses that they wouldn't do. And I started to wonder, it says that a new generation rose up that did not know God. And I thought, this could be the result of not doing all the active remembering that we've been talking about. Remember, we've been saying God wants them to remember and set up memorials, and how important it is for us to remember the things that God has done and to pass them on to our kids. Remember, Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now, remember, the Proverbs are not promises. They're wise sayings. They are sayings of, this usually happens. And so it's saying that if we're passing on our faith, our kids are probably going to stick with it. So my point is, keep going with your kids. Keep going. Be encouraged, because we want to keep passing it on. We want to do the active remembering. Judges 3, we see Israel's cycle of defeat and disobedience. So they abandon God, and then he lets them be overcome. Then they cry out to God, and he rescues them. And we're going to see that over and over. And it's oh shoot, here we're at 6 minutes. This is my last thing. Okay, so it's similar to our cycle of falling away from God or walking away from God. Is there somewhere I've been disobedient or turned away from God? And so we want to make sure we're not falling into that cycle of walking away from God and being like, crap, and then coming back. And so we can ask God, give a check in my spirit. This is my point. Ask God to give us a check in our spirit when we feel like turning away. Give me a check in my spirit when I feel like turning away from you. That's it. All right, that's not bad for 6 chapters. Okay, April 1st, which is today, April Fool's Day, but this is true. Judges 4 through 6. Judges 4 through 6, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. Goodbye.